So this is the first of a series of videos on how to build a linked list. Now, when we are building a linked list, and specifically when we're adding or inserting an item into the linked list, there will be a certain number of scenarios we're going to have to consider, and that will it's actually fairly straightforward. The number of scenarios we have to keep in mind range from 3 to 5 different scenarios, and they're both for add and remove. So that sounds like there's 10 scenarios to remember total, possibly. But fortunately, they're all symmetric scenarios. So hold on a second. They're all symmetric scenarios. So if you remember add, you'll remember removes. So and fortunately, one of the scenarios we've already learned. So the first thing we want to do when we add an item to a linked list. All right, so first things first is that the add methods look exactly like they will in an array list. Public void or public boolean add item to the linked list, right? And this will just, until we figure out what we're going to do with it, we're just going to say return false. And then public boolean, and then public void add, we're going to add int index. Is it index first, I believe? Let's double check, right? Yep, int index and item. Okay, so there will be 3 conditions we need to set up when we add a linked list, or when we are adding an item to a linked list. Okay, first we'll go over the first one first. Okay, first condition is fairly simple. Is that a valid index? Okay, so specifically we're checking, because there's going to be a lot of different if statements in here, but this one we need to check first. If index, so what are our valid indices, right? Well, we get them from, we can use the same ones as my array list, right? If the index that we're trying to add to is less than 0, well, obviously we can't add that to our linked list. Or our index is greater than size. Not greater than or equal to, because remember, we want to be able to add to index size. Okay, so we want it greater than the size of the list, right? We can always slap an item onto the end with no problem. But if that's the case, then all we're going to do is return, we're going to not return, but we'll throw an array out of bounds exception or something like that. So throw new list, throw new out of index out of bounds exception. That sounds good. Okay. Right, so we'll give them that. So the scenario 1. Now this linked list I'm coding up here, the singly linked list that we're doing here, I'm only going to do 3 scenarios at first. Once we keep, having a tail necessitates us having a 4th scenario, but for right now it will just be 3 scenarios. So scenario 1 that we have to handle is index is out of bounds, and we kind of get that for free because we already know how to do that. If the index is out of bounds, just yell at the user. Scenario 2. Adding a new head, right? We're adding a node, and we're adding an item, and it's going to be the new first item in the list, right? And the reason this needs to be a scenario is because this will require head to change. Now, scenario 3 is going to be really hard in terms of understanding what it is. That's it. That's all our 3 scenarios. First, check if the index is out of bound. Scenario 2 is check if we're adding a new head. Or scenario 3, adding anywhere in the list. Okay? Now this one isn't so bad when we will write a helper method that we'll use a lot in the other ones. But we'll come back to, but what we're going to do in the next couple videos is, next video we'll cover this scenario. Okay, so that way we can actually just start adding items to our linked list. Okay, that way we can start building it and start testing it out. The next thing we're going to do is build the method over here that will be the helper method for doing this. Then we'll come back and finish up the add method. Okay, and then once those are done, we can start tackling the remove method. After all those are done, that's really it. The get and set pretty much are fairly straightforward. They come from you get them for writing what the helper method. This helper method we're going to write after scenario 2 is pretty straightforward. The linked lists are not complicated. They just have a lot of moving parts, and those individual small moving parts just require a bit of understanding what's going on. And this is one of those cases where drawing really helps.